Coming up on Network Africa. More troops deployed to the army headquarters in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, where thousands of protesters call for the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir. The United Nations says more than 2,000 people have fled their homes as fighting continues in the south of the Libyan capital, Tripoli. And Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni assures tourists of the safety of his country after a U.S. citizen and her local guide were freed. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Tenyola Shoboali. We begin this week's edition of the program with stories and happenings that made headlines over the weekend. It was a solemn weekend in Rwanda as the country marked 25 years since the genocide that killed hundreds of thousands of people. President Paul Kagame and a number of visiting dignitaries attended a memorial ceremony on Sunday to commemorate the lives of 800,000 Tutsi and moderate Hutus murdered during the genocide.
Survivors are the only ones with something left to give, their forgiveness. And that is their forgiveness. Our people have carried an immense weight with little or no complaint. This has made us better and more united than ever before.
Following a wrestling ceremony, Kagame was among those who lit a commemorative torch at the Gisozi Memorial Site on the northern outskirts of Kigali, where more than 250,000 of the dead are buried. A solemn walk and candlelight vigil was held in the evening. The president led thousands of people in a march from Parliament to the National Soccer Stadium where lights were extinguished, so only candles and flames flickered as survivors spoke. At least 21 people were killed and 27 wounded in fighting near the Libyan capital, Tripoli. Rebel forces under General Khalifa Haftar advanced from the east as Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj accused him of attempting a coup. The Prime Minister vowed to defend Tripoli, saying rebels will meet with the force. Earlier, the United Nations appealed for a 2-hour truce so casualties and civilians could be evacuated, but fighting continued. Algerian protesters gathered in Paris on Sunday to celebrate former Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's resignation and push for the removal of the current political structure in their home country. Bouteflika ended 20 years in power on Tuesday after a final push by the military for him to stand down. His resignation follows 6 weeks of protest calling for democratic reforms after almost 60 years of monolithic rule by veterans of the 1954 to 1962 independence war against France. That leaves Algeria extraordinary in the hands of a caretaker government until elections in 3 months and with no successor in sight. Now to our main story today. More troops have been deployed to the army headquarters in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, where thousands of protesters have been demonstrating since Saturday, calling for the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir and the end to his government. Barricades have been put up by soldiers who have also blocked nearby roads. Information Minister Hassan Ismail is quoted as saying that the crowd in front of the Military General Command has been cleared completely. He also dismissed reports that some soldiers are helping the protesters, saying that the security operatives are coherent together and working with positive energy and in harmony. Eyewitnesses say elements of the military have acted to protect protesters in Khartoum after security forces fired tear gas to break up a mass sit-in. Now, the only functioning airport in Libya's capital, Tripoli, has been hit by an airstrike as fighting continues in the country. Flights at Mitiga Airport, which is about 10 kilometers east of the center of the city, have now been suspended, and there are no reports yet on casualties. Forces under General Khalifa Haftar began advancing from the east on Thursday with the aim of taking Tripoli, clashing with groups backing the UN-backed government. Meanwhile, the United Nations says over 2,000 people have fled their homes and that many civilians are trapped. The country's internationally recognized government said at least 32 of its fighters had been killed since the military commander launched an assault on the city last week. The United States have demanded an immediate halt to the offensive by the Libyan militia leader. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said the U.S. will continue to press Libyan leaders to return to political talks brokered by the UN. The EU has also urged the warring parties to declare a truce and return to negotiations.
I think the first message we need to pass united is the full implementation of the humanitarian truce to allow the civilians and the wounded to be evacuated from the city and to avoid any further military action and any further military escalation and the return to the political negotiations and the political track.